a woman in shadows in the heart of New York City, where dreams are built and broken in the blink of an eye, lived a woman no one truly knew. Her name was Eleanor Parker, but the world knew her by a different name, the Ghost Billionaire. Despite having a fortune that could rival the wealthiest names in the world, she chose to live a simple life. She walked among the common people, worked minimum-wage jobs, and never revealed her true identity. Dressed in worn-out clothes, Eleanor worked as a barista in a small cafe, a janitor at a local library, and even a cashier at a grocery store. To the outside world, she was just another struggling woman trying to make ends meet. But behind those tired eyes was a woman who had built an empire, one that spanned industries from technology to real estate. She wasn't doing this for thrill or secrecy. Eleanor had a mission. She wanted to understand the struggles of the people she silently helped. She had donated millions to charities, built homes for the homeless, and funded countless scholarships. Yet, she remained unseen, unrecognized. One evening, exhausted after a long shift, Eleanor walked into a small food truck for a quick meal. The owner, a kind-hearted man in his mid-30s named Jake Dawson, noticed her. To him, she looked like a woman down on her luck, her shoes scuffed, her coat barely warm enough for the chilly weather. Without hesitation, he handed her a warm sandwich and a cup of coffee. "It's on the house," he said with a gentle smile. Eleanor was taken aback. It had been years since someone had treated her with such kindness. She looked into Jake's eyes and saw something rare, genuine compassion. She nodded, took the meal, and quietly walked away. Little did Jake know, the woman he just helped was about to change his life forever. Jake Dawson had always been a giver. He wasn't rich, but he had a heart full of kindness. Running a small food truck near Central Park wasn't the dream he once had, but it was enough to get by. Life had thrown him many challenges, losing his parents young, dropping out of college due to financial troubles, and struggling to keep his business afloat. Yet, he never let hardship take away his compassion. When he saw Eleanor, he didn't think twice before offering her food. To him, she was just another person trying to survive in a city that never stopped moving. Eleanor sat on a park bench, eating the sandwich slowly, her mind racing. She had spent years in disguise, experiencing life from the ground up. She had met selfish people, greedy business tycoons, and opportunists. But Jake was different. He gave without expecting anything in return. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor kept visiting Jake's food truck. At first, he assumed she was just another struggling woman looking for a warm meal. But soon, he noticed something. She always paid for her food, even when he offered it for free. "You don't have to do that," Jake said one evening, handing her a cup of hot chocolate. "I see you working so hard. If you ever need help, just ask." Eleanor smiled, appreciating his kindness but knowing she could never tell him the truth. "I appreciate it, but I manage," she said simply. Jake didn't push. He had met many people who were too proud to ask for help. Instead, he just continued being kind, treating her with respect. One night, as Eleanor walked away from the food truck, she heard a commotion. A few feet away, a young boy was crying, standing alone in the freezing cold. Without hesitation, she approached him. "Hey there, are you okay?" she asked, kneeling to his level. The boy sniffled. "I lost my mom. I don't know where she is." Eleanor's heart ached. She looked around, hoping to spot the child's mother. Just then, Jake appeared behind her. "What's going on?" he asked. "This boy is lost," Eleanor explained. Without a second thought, Jake took off his jacket and wrapped it around the child. "We'll find your mom, buddy. Don't worry." Together, they searched the park, asking people if they had seen a frantic mother. After nearly an hour, they found her. A woman in tears, searching desperately. The moment she saw her son, she ran to him, crying as she hugged him tightly. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much," she sobbed. Jake simply smiled. It's what anyone would do. But Eleanor knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would stop. Not everyone would care. And in that moment, she realized something. Jake Dawson was special. And he had no idea that his kindness had just earned him something far greater than a thank you. Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Over the next few weeks, she found herself watching him closely. Not in a way that made her feel intrusive, but with a curiosity she couldn't shake. Jake was different from the people she had encountered before. He wasn't just kind in passing. Kindness was his way of life. Whether it was giving a free meal to a struggling college student, helping an elderly woman carry her groceries, or simply listening to people who had no one else, Jake had a heart that never wavered. Eleanor, despite all her wealth and influence, had spent most of her life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Investors, business partners, and social climbers. All of them were drawn to her success, not her soul. But Jake? He didn't even know who she really was. One evening, as she sat by his food truck, she noticed the worry in his eyes. He was usually full of energy, always greeting customers with a warm smile. But today he seemed distant, distracted. "Everything okay?" she asked casually, sipping on her hot chocolate. Jake hesitated, then let out a sigh. "Business has been slow," he admitted. "I'm behind on my truck payments. If things don't pick up, I might have to shut down." Eleanor's heart sank. She had the power to change his life with a single phone call, but she knew she couldn't just hand him money. Jake was proud just like she was. He believed in hard work, in earning his way. "Maybe things will turn around," she said, trying to sound hopeful. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "I appreciate the optimism, but I'm just one guy with a food truck. It's hard to compete with the big restaurants around here." Eleanor wanted to tell him the truth, that she was one of the most powerful business minds in the country, that she had built empires from nothing, that she could help him. But instead, she just nodded. "People like you deserve good things," she said softly. "I hope you get them." Jake smiled at her, and for a brief moment, she felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. What neither of them knew was that fate was already setting things in motion. And soon, everything was about to change. Eleanor couldn't get Jake's words out of her head. She had spent years living among people who only cared about profits, but here was a man who simply wanted to serve others. And yet, he was struggling. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her modest apartment. She had built multi-million-dollar companies from scratch, had turned failing businesses into industry leaders, and yet, she felt powerless in this moment. Not because she couldn't help Jake. She could, but because she knew he would never accept a handout. No, she needed to find another way, a way that would let him keep his pride while still giving him the break he so desperately needed. The next day, she took a different route to work. Instead of heading to her usual part-time job at the library, she walked into a bustling business district where some of the city's top restaurants and cafes were located. She observed their customers, their operations, their marketing tactics. Then she had an idea. She spent the next few days carefully designing a strategy. One that would boost Jake's food truck without him realizing she was behind it. Her first step? Word of mouth. She started subtly telling people in her part-time jobs about Jake's truck. She mentioned it to coworkers, to students in the library, and even to customers at the grocery store where she worked. "Have you tried that food truck near Central Park?" she would say casually. "It's amazing. And the guy who runs it is one of the kindest people you'll ever meet." And just like that, curiosity started to spread. But that was just the beginning. Eleanor had one more trick up her sleeve. Eleanor knew that word of mouth alone wouldn't be enough to save Jake's food truck. She needed something bigger, something that would make people talk, share, and remember. She spent the next few nights working on her plan. While the world saw her as a struggling woman working odd jobs, in reality, she was still one of the sharpest business strategists alive. She knew exactly what made a business thrive, and she was about to put her skills to use. Her first move? Social media. She created an anonymous Instagram and Twitter account under the name The Kindness Chronicles and started posting about businesses that deserved recognition. Her first post was about Jake's food truck. "In a city that never sleeps, there's a food truck that never stops giving. A man who feeds others even when his own struggles go unnoticed. If you're ever near Central Park, stop by Dawson's Deli and taste not just food, but kindness." Hashtag support local, hashtag hidden gem. She took a simple, natural photo of Jake handing food to a smiling customer. Authentic, real, and powerful. The post didn't go viral immediately, but Eleanor wasn't done yet. She reached out to a few food bloggers anonymously, pretending to be just another New Yorker who had discovered an incredible spot. Some ignored her, but one, a well-known food critic with thousands of followers, decided to check it out. A few days later, Jake was working as usual when a woman with a camera stepped up to his truck. "Hey there," she said with a smile. "I've been hearing about your food all over social media. Mind if I try something?" Jake blinked, surprised. He wasn't used to attention like this. Sure. What would you like?" The woman ordered, took a few photos, and left with a simple, "I'll be in touch." Jake thought nothing of it. But Eleanor knew everything was about to change. The next morning, Jake woke up to something strange. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He groggily picked it up and saw an overwhelming flood of notifications. Messages, social media alerts, emails, things he had never seen before. Confused, he clicked on one of the links a friend had sent him. It led to an Instagram post, a post about him. The food critic from the previous day had written a review titled, "The best food truck in NYC that no one talks about until now." Jake read, his eyes widening with every word. It's not often you find a place that serves not just good food, but good energy. Dawson's Deli is a small food truck near Central Park, run by a man who treats every customer like family. His sandwiches are a must-try, but what makes this place special is the heart behind it. In a city where kindness can be rare, this truck is a reminder that good people still exist. Trust me. You want to go here before the line gets too long. And as if the universe wanted to prove the critic right, that very morning the line was already forming. For the first time in months, Jake had customers waiting before he even opened. He barely had time to process what was happening before the first customer stepped up. "I saw your food truck on Instagram," the man said excitedly. "That sandwich looks insane. I'll take two." Then another, and another. By noon, Jake had completely sold out of food. He stood in his truck, looking at the empty shelves in disbelief. This had never happened before. Meanwhile, Eleanor watched from a distance, a small smile on her face. Her plan was working, but she wasn't done yet. Jake had never seen a day like this. His food truck, which once struggled to get a few customers, was now the talk of the town. People were lining up before he even opened, and by noon he was completely sold out. But success came with its own set of challenges. By the third day of the rush, Jake was overwhelmed. His supplies ran out faster than ever. He was working long hours without breaks, and exhaustion was catching up to him. He was grateful but also struggling to keep up. That evening, as he packed up his truck, Eleanor approached him. "Rough day?" she asked, noticing the fatigue in his face. Jake let out a tired chuckle. "You could say that. I don't know what happened, but suddenly everyone wants to eat here. It's unbelievable." Eleanor smiled. "You deserve it." Jake shook his head. "I just make sandwiches." "No," Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. "You make people feel like they matter, and that's why they keep coming back." Jake stared at her for a moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he sighed. "I just don't know how I'll handle this. I wasn't prepared for this kind of demand." Eleanor knew this was her moment to step in. "Maybe you just need some help," she said casually. Jake sighed. "Yeah, but hiring people costs money, and I still have a loan to pay off for this truck." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "What if you had a partner?" Jake looked at her, confused. "A partner?" She shrugged. "Someone who could help with the business. Maybe even invest a little." Jake laughed. "You? Come on, you barely have enough to pay for a coffee some days." Eleanor smirked. If only he knew. "Just think about it," she said. "Maybe the right person could help you take this to the next level." Jake didn't reply immediately, but Eleanor could see the wheels turning in his head, and she knew this was just the beginning. Jake spent the entire night thinking about Eleanor's words. Partner? He had never considered it before. This food truck was his dream, his one shot at making something of himself. But with the overwhelming success of the past few days, he knew that if he didn't adapt, he would crash and burn. The next morning, as he prepped for the day, Eleanor showed up like usual. But this time, Jake didn't just see her as a regular customer. He saw her as someone who genuinely understood him. "Were you serious about what you said yesterday?" Jake asked as she sipped her coffee. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Being a partner," he said hesitantly. "I mean, I don't have much to offer. But if you're willing to work, maybe we could figure something out." Eleanor held back a smile. She had planned for this moment. "I don't have a lot of money," she said carefully, knowing she had to play this right. "But I have experience running things. What if, instead of investing cash, I helped you scale up? You know, turn Dawson's Deli into something bigger?" Jake frowned. "Bigger? Like opening another truck?" Eleanor leaned in. "Why stop at another truck? If we do this right, Dawson's Deli could become a franchise." Jake let out a laugh, shaking his head. "A franchise? I'm just a guy making sandwiches, Eleanor. That's crazy." She smiled knowingly. "Is it? Because 3 days ago, you didn't think you'd have a line down the block either." Jake stared at her, realization dawning in his eyes. She was right. Maybe, just maybe, he had been thinking too small. And maybe, with Eleanor's help, he could dream bigger than ever before. Jake couldn't shake Eleanor's words. A franchise? Him? The idea was absurd. Yet something about it felt right. That night, after closing the food truck, he sat down with a notebook and started scribbling. What would it take? More ingredients, more trucks, maybe even a small restaurant someday. But how? He sighed, staring at the numbers. He was barely keeping up with the costs of running one truck. Expanding? That was another level of risk entirely. The next day, he found Eleanor already waiting for him when he arrived at the truck. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, smirking. "I didn't," Jake admitted. "I was thinking about what you said. And maybe you're right." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "You mean?" "I mean, I have no idea where to start," Jake interrupted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But if you think you can actually help me pull this off, I'm willing to listen." Eleanor grinned. "That's all I needed to hear." She pulled out her phone and opened a document. "I spent last night working on a strategy." Jake blinked. "A strategy?" "Of course," she said casually, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Look, you've already got the demand. People love your food, and they love your story. What you need now is a plan." She showed him a list of steps. Create a brand identity. Right now, Dawson's Deli was just a food truck. It needed to become a name people remembered. Set up a social media presence. The viral post was just the beginning. They needed a full-blown marketing strategy. Expand the menu slightly. Keep the best sellers but add new items that would attract even more customers. Find an investor. Because let's be real, scaling up wasn't cheap. Jake stared at her, impressed. "You did all this in one night?" Eleanor shrugged. "I like helping good people." Jake exhaled, still trying to process. "All right," he finally said. "Let's do this." Eleanor smiled. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Because Jake Dawson had no idea who she really was, and that she had the power to change his life forever. Jake had never worked with a business partner before. He had built his food truck from scratch, figuring things out along the way. But Eleanor? She had a clear vision, and for the first time he felt like he wasn't doing this alone. The first step was branding. Eleanor designed a sleek, modern logo for Dawson's Deli. It was simple but memorable, featuring a bold font with a warm, inviting touch. "We want people to recognize your name instantly," she explained. She also created a professional Instagram and Facebook page, filling it with mouth-watering photos of his sandwiches, behind-the-scenes clips, and customer testimonials. Jake was skeptical at first. Social media? Do people really care about that? Eleanor smirked. "Let's find out." She made a post. "Dawson's Deli is more than just a food truck. It's a place where kindness is served with every meal. Come taste the difference." Then she reached out to some local food influencers who had engaged with the viral post before. Within hours, comments started pouring in. "This place looks amazing. Where exactly is it? I need to try this ASAP. That sandwich looks unreal. Do you guys deliver?" Jake was stunned. "This is crazy." Eleanor smiled. "This is just the beginning. The next step? Scaling up." Jake's one-man operation wouldn't last long under this demand. He needed extra hands, better supplies, and a system that worked. That's when Eleanor made her next move. "Leave that to me," she said. Jake had no idea that Eleanor Parker, the woman he thought was just another struggling worker, was about to make a call that would change everything. Jake was too busy handling the food truck rush to notice what Eleanor was doing behind the scenes. She had spent years hiding her identity, but now, for the first time, she was about to use her power for someone who truly deserved it. That night, she sat in her tiny apartment, pulled out her laptop, and made one call. It wasn't to just any investor. It was to one of the biggest venture capitalists in New York City. A man who had no idea that the struggling woman calling him was actually the billionaire he had been trying to get a meeting with for years. "Eleanor?" The voice on the other end sounded surprised. "You're calling me? Let's keep this quick, Sam," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I have a business I want you to look at." Sam Harper was one of the most powerful investors in the city. If he believed in a business, it boomed overnight. Eleanor sent him a detailed report about Dawson's Deli, the numbers, the viral marketing, the social media impact. Sam glanced through the proposal, intrigued. "This is interesting, but why are you bringing this to me? What's in it for you?" Eleanor smirked. "Nothing. I just know a great business when I see one." Sam hesitated. "I'll need to meet the owner." "You will," Eleanor said. "Just remember, he doesn't know about me. Treat him like any other entrepreneur." Sam chuckled. "You're full of surprises, Eleanor." "Fine. Set up the meeting." Eleanor hung up and exhaled. Jake had no idea that he was about to step into a meeting that could change his life forever. And the best part? He still thought Eleanor was just another struggling worker. The next morning, Jake was running his food truck as usual, completely unaware that his life was about to change. The crowd was growing every day, and he barely had a moment to breathe between taking orders, grilling sandwiches, and making sure everything was perfect. Then, something unusual happened. A black luxury car pulled up near the food truck, and a sharply dressed man stepped out. He adjusted his designer suit and looked around, scanning the line. Jake barely noticed him, he was too busy. But Eleanor did. She watched as Sam Harper made his way toward the truck, observing everything like a seasoned businessman. He walked up to the counter, and when Jake finally looked up, he saw the stranger's confident smirk. "You must be Jake Dawson." Jake wiped his hands on a towel. "Yeah, and you are?" Sam extended a hand. "Sam Harper. I'm an investor." Jake hesitated before shaking his hand. "Okay. And why is an investor at my food truck?" Sam chuckled. "Because someone told me you might be the next big thing." Jake blinked. "Wait, who?" Sam just smirked. "Let's just say a little birdie believes in you. And now I want to see what the hype is about." Jake still didn't understand what was happening, but he wasn't about to turn away an opportunity. "Well, if you're here for food, you're in luck," Jake said, handing Sam a sandwich. "This one's on the house." Sam took a bite and nodded, clearly impressed. "Not bad. Not bad at all." Then he looked Jake straight in the eye. "Let's talk business." Jake sat across from Sam Harper at a small table outside the food truck. The crowd had thinned for the afternoon, giving him a rare break. He still had no idea how this was happening. Why was a top investor suddenly interested in Dawson's Deli? Sam wiped his hands with a napkin, set down his sandwich, and leaned forward. "Let's cut to the chase," Sam said. "You've got something special here, Jake. The demand, the social buzz, it's all lining up. Your business has the potential to grow, but you need resources, a solid plan, and capital to scale up." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And let me guess, you're offering that?" Sam smirked. "I might be, but first I need to know what you want." Where do you see Dawson's Deli in the next 5 years? Jake hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. He had always focused on surviving, not dreaming. But then he thought about Eleanor's words. Why stop at one truck? Jake took a deep breath. I want Dawson's Deli to be a name people remember. Not just another food truck, but something bigger. A brand that brings people together. Sam nodded approvingly. Good answer. Now here's my offer. Jake sat up straighter, his heart pounding. I'll invest $500,000 into Dawson's Deli, Sam said. We'll open a second truck, upgrade your equipment, and build a team to manage the workload. If that goes well, we expand further, maybe even a restaurant. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. $500,000? It was more money than he had ever imagined. But there had to be a catch. What do you get out of this? Jake asked cautiously. Sam smirked. 30% ownership. I help you grow, and in return I get a cut of the success. Jake exhaled, rubbing his face. This was real. This was actually happening. Then he looked over at Eleanor. She had been silent the whole time, watching with an unreadable expression. Something told him she knew more than she was letting on. But for now, he had a life-changing decision to make. Jake sat in silence, staring at the offer in front of him. $500,000. A chance to expand, to finally make Dawson's Deli more than just a single food truck. It was everything he had dreamed of, but something held him back. He looked over at Eleanor, who was sitting quietly, watching him. She had been his biggest supporter, his voice of reason. And for some reason, she wasn't saying anything. Sam leaned forward. Jake, I can see your hesitation. I get it, this is big. But I'm not here to take over your business. I'm here to help you make it something legendary. Jake swallowed. I appreciate that. But 30% ownership? That's a big chunk. Sam shrugged. That's business. You need capital and I need a return. But I'm offering more than just money. I bring experience, connections, and marketing power. With me on board, you're not just running a truck, you're building a brand. Jake's mind raced. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He could finally hire staff, buy better equipment, maybe even open a second truck. But deep down, he felt like something wasn't right. He glanced at Eleanor again. She still hadn't spoken. So he made a decision. I need to think about it, Jake said firmly. Sam's expression didn't change. He simply nodded. Take your time, but don't take too long. Opportunities don't wait forever. Sam stood up, straightened his suit, and handed Jake his business card. When you're ready, call me. Then he walked away, leaving Jake with the biggest decision of his life. As soon as Sam was gone, Jake turned to Eleanor. You knew about this, didn't you? Eleanor met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she said, There's something you don't know. Jake's heart pounded. What do you mean? Eleanor took a deep breath. It was time to tell him the truth. Part 15. The truth unfolds. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he looked at Eleanor. For months, she had been by his side, helping him, guiding him, believing in him. But now, she was about to tell him something that felt bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Eleanor exhaled and finally spoke. Jake, I'm not who you think I am. He frowned. What does that mean? She hesitated for a moment, then pulled out her phone. With a few taps, she opened a news article from Forbes. Jake leaned in and felt his breath catch. Right there on the screen was a photo of Eleanor. But she wasn't wearing her usual simple coat or scuffed shoes. She was dressed in a power suit, standing in front of a skyscraper, with the headline, Meet Eleanor Parker, the ghost billionaire who built an empire in silence. Jake's entire world tilted. He stared at the article, then at Eleanor, then back at the article. No, he whispered, shaking his head. You're not. I am, she said softly. I built some of the biggest companies in the country, but I never wanted the spotlight. I walked away from it all to see the world from the ground up, to understand the struggles people face. That's how I found you. Jake's mind was spinning. The woman he thought was just another struggling worker had been a billionaire all along? So, Everything you did for me, the social media, the food critics, the investors, was all part of your plan? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Eleanor shook her head. No, Jake, I didn't plan for this. I helped because I believe in you. Because you deserve this. Jake's heart pounded. And Sam? He was your contact, wasn't he? Eleanor nodded. I called him, but I didn't tell him who I was. I just gave him the facts. I wanted him to see Dawson's Deli for what it really is. Jake stood up, running a hand through his hair. This was too much. You lied to me, he said finally. Eleanor's face fell. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. Jake let out a shaky breath. So what now? Am I just another project for you? Another business to fix? Eleanor's eyes softened. Jake, you were never a project. You're the first person I've met who made me believe in something more than just money. Silence stretched between them. For the first time since they met, Jake didn't know what to say. And Eleanor wasn't sure if she had just saved their friendship or lost it forever. Jake felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Eleanor, a billionaire? The woman he had shared his struggles with, the woman he thought was just another hardworking New Yorker, had been hiding the biggest secret of all. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. I don't even know what to say. Eleanor's voice was quiet. Say whatever you need to. Jake spun around, frustration flashing in his eyes. You should have told me. I wanted to, she admitted. But I knew you'd treat me differently if you knew. Jake let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, because billionaires don't exactly show up at food trucks looking for jobs. Eleanor swallowed. I didn't do this to play games, Jake. I did it because I wanted to experience life differently. And then, I met you. And for the first time, I saw someone who wasn't chasing money. Someone who cared more about people than profit. Jake shook his head. And yet, you had the power to change everything for me, and you just watched me struggle. Eleanor's eyes filled with emotion. I helped in the ways I could, without taking away your pride. Do you think you would have accepted a check from me if I told you the truth? Jake opened his mouth, then shut it. She was right. If she had come to him as a billionaire offering money, he would have refused immediately. But still, it hurt. He took a deep breath, his voice calmer now. So what happens now? Are you still part of this? Eleanor hesitated. That depends on you. Jake studied her, trying to understand what he was feeling. Betrayed? Grateful? Confused? Maybe all of it. He sighed. I need time to think. Eleanor nodded. Her eyes filled with something Jake couldn't quite read. She turned to leave, and for the first time since they met, Jake let her go. Jake spent the next few days in a fog. The food truck was busier than ever. Lines stretching down the street, orders flying in, people raving about Dawson's Deli. And yet, for the first time, he felt completely alone. Eleanor was gone. She hadn't called. She hadn't stopped by. She had given him space, exactly what he had asked for. But now, with every sandwich he made, with every smiling customer he served, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He tried to focus on business. The meeting with Sam Harper was still on the table. The $500,000 investment was waiting for his answer. But every time he looked at the contract, he felt uneasy. Something about it didn't sit right. He had worked his whole life to build something on his own. But if he took Sam's deal, Dawson's Deli wouldn't just be his anymore. It would belong to someone else too. And that thought scared him. Late one night, long after the truck had closed, Jake sat on the curb, staring at the city lights. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. His thumb hovered over Eleanor's name. Should he call her? Before he could decide, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello. A voice on the other end spoke. It wasn't Eleanor. It wasn't Sam. And within seconds, Jake's entire world shifted again. Jake gripped his phone tighter. Who is this? The voice on the other end was calm, confident, familiar. Mr. Dawson, the man said. My name is Robert Langley. I run one of the largest hospitality chains in the country. And I believe you're the man I need. Jake's heart pounded. What? I've been following your story, Langley continued. Your food truck, your sudden rise in popularity, the way people are talking about Dawson's Deli. It's rare to see something so authentic in the food industry. And I like authentic. Jake struggled to find his voice. I appreciate that. But what exactly are you offering? Langley chuckled. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Jake swallowed hard. I own a chain of upscale eateries and food markets across the country. But what we don't have. A fast casual brand with real soul. A place that feels personal, that makes people feel like they're part of something special. And I think Dawson's Deli could be that brand. Jake froze. Here's my offer, Langley continued. I want to partner with you, not buy you out. You keep majority ownership. I provide the funding, the locations, the resources. Together, we build something nationwide. A legacy. Jake couldn't breathe. This wasn't just an investment. This was a dream. But here's the thing, Langley said. You have another offer on the table, don't you? Jake blinked. How do you know that? Langley chuckled. Jake, in this industry, people talk. And Sam Harper? He's a shark. You take his deal, and Dawson's Deli won't be yours for long. Jake clenched his jaw. Langley's voice softened. Look, I don't expect an answer now, but I'd love to meet. No pressure, just two business owners talking. Jake exhaled. Okay. When? Tomorrow, Langley said. My office. 10 a.m. Jake nodded. I'll be there. The call ended, and Jake stared at his phone, his mind spinning. Two offers. Two completely different futures. And only one felt right. But before he could think any further, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. From Eleanor. 4 words. Meet me. Midnight. Park. Jake's pulse quickened. For the first time in days, he realized something. He needed to see her. The night air was crisp as Jake made his way to the park. The streets were quieter now, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. But inside, his mind was louder than ever. Two offers. Two completely different futures. And now Eleanor. He wasn't sure what she wanted to say, but something inside him told him this conversation would change everything. As he approached the park bench, he saw her. Eleanor, waiting in the moonlight. She looked different. Not just because she wasn't wearing her usual work clothes, but because she looked vulnerable. Jake exhaled, stepping closer. Hey! She turned, her eyes meeting his. Hey! For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor took a deep breath. I heard about Langley. Jake blinked. How? She gave him a knowing look. I still have connections, Jake. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, it's a lot to process. Eleanor nodded. So what are you thinking? Jake hesitated, then sat down beside her. Honestly, Sam Harper's deal doesn't sit right with me. I'd be giving up too much control. Langley, though, he's offering me something real. Something I can build without losing Dawson's Deli. Eleanor smiled softly. That's the right choice. Jake turned to her, studying her expression. Why do I feel like you already knew I'd pick that? Eleanor chuckled. Because I know you, Jake. You were never meant to be just another businessman. You're meant to build something that matters. Jake looked down at his hands. So what now? Eleanor exhaled. Now, you take the meeting. You start the next chapter. Jake frowned. And what about us? Eleanor hesitated, looking away. That's up to you. Silence hung between them. Then Jake did something he hadn't planned. He reached for her hand. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. You may have hidden who you were, Jake said softly. But everything you did, it was real, wasn't it? Eleanor nodded. Every moment. Jake squeezed her hand. Then maybe we figure this out. Together. Eleanor's breath caught. You mean that? Jake smiled. You believe in me. Now it's my turn to believe in you. Eleanor's heart raced. For the first time in years, she felt something more valuable than wealth. She felt seen. Jake stood up, offering her his hand. Walk with me. Eleanor smiled, taking it. Tomorrow, Jake Dawson would walk into the biggest meeting of his life. But tonight, he walked with the woman who made him believe in something bigger than success. The next morning, Jake stood in front of Robert Langley's office, his heart pounding. This was it, the biggest opportunity of his life. He glanced at his reflection in the glass door, a man who had built something from nothing. A man who had once believed he was just another food truck owner but now stood at the edge of something much greater. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Langley was waiting, his sharp gaze analyzing Jake the moment he walked in. "Glad you made it," Langley said with a grin, gesturing to the seat across from him. Jake sat down, meeting his gaze. "Let's talk." For the next hour, they went over the details, the vision, the future. Langley laid out the expansion plans, the funding, and the structure of the deal. Jake listened carefully. This time, he wasn't just reacting, he was leading. He asked the right questions. He negotiated terms that ensured Dawson's Deli remained his. By the time they shook hands, Jake had secured the deal of a lifetime, and for the first time he felt like he had truly earned it. 6 months later, Dawson's Deli wasn't just a food truck anymore. It was a brand. 2 new locations had opened, one in Brooklyn, one in Manhattan. And more were on the way. People lined up every day, not just for the food, but for what Dawson's Deli stood for. Quality, authenticity, and kindness. Jake stood outside his new location, watching as customers filled the place, his heart swelling with pride. Then he felt a presence beside him. Eleanor. She looked at him, smiling. "So, you did it." Jake chuckled. "We did it." She raised an eyebrow. "I didn't do much." Jake turned to her. "Eleanor, you changed my life." She bit her lip. "And what about us?" Jake studied her for a long moment, then took her hand. "I don't know where this goes," he admitted. "But I know one thing. I don't want to do this without you." Eleanor's heart pounded. "Jake," he smiled. "Stay. Let's build this together." Eleanor looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had once belonged to a man struggling to survive but now belonged to a man who had created his own success. She nodded. "Okay." Jake grinned, pulling her into a hug. A billionaire had once hidden her identity to experience the real world. A food truck owner had once believed he was destined to struggle. Together, they had proven that kindness, hard work, and belief could change everything. And as they stood outside the newest Dawson's Deli, hand in hand, they both knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning.